Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I wanted to put together a guide to the various bosses that are available in Path of Exile after you've defeated everything in the core storyline of the game. So the core storyline of the game concludes when you complete Act 10 and you kill Kitava. At that point, you will gain access to a map device in your hideout. You'll have a small little bit of stuffing around before you actually get the map device installed. But you pretty much immediately you'll get access to the map device, and then it's sort of left up to you what you want to do next. What I wanted to do is put together a guide that outlines the various bosses and breaks them into 5 tiers and gives you a little bit of a sense as to what you might want to go for, what bosses are around that you might be able to access now but that are probably not worth trying because you won't be able to beat them yet, and to give you a sense of some of the things that are worth working towards. So first up, I want to talk about my 5 tiers. The first tier of bosses is the bosses that I think that if you've beaten Kitava, you're already pretty close to beating these ones. The second tier is bosses that you will need to improve to beat, but not by very much. The third tier is the bosses that I feel that anyone that gets addicted to this game and plays a lot at endgame can beat, but maybe not on their first try. The fourth tier is bosses that I feel require a degree of careful execution, min-maxing of your characters, but that don't go out of their way to absolutely crush your hopes and dreams. And then the fifth tier are the ones that just take all the kid gloves off. These are the bosses that try to kill you, that try to crush your hopes, try to crush your dreams, try to destroy you, and unless you are extremely min-maxed and somewhat of a power gamer, they will. So, in terms of the tier 1 bosses, the first boss that needs to be mentioned is Merciless Izaro. So you will have undoubtedly encountered the Aspirant's Plaza while you were leveling your character and various Trials of Ascendancy. The 3 Trials of Ascendancy you need to access the Merciless Labyrinth. So obviously you need to have beaten the Cruel Labyrinth. You then need to find the Trial of Ascendancy in the Bathhouse in Act 8, the Tunnel in Act 9, and the Ossuary in Act 10. And then just simply come here and activate the Merciless Labyrinth. Izaro at the end of the Merciless Labyrinth is quite a bit harder in my opinion than Kitava, and especially because if you die in the Izaro fight, you need to start the entire labyrinth again. That's one of the things that can make it quite unforgiving, but that said, it's very doable. Izaro's attacks are all telegraphed and slow, with the exception of the offering of with the Goddess's Mortar Barrage attack. All of them have quite a bit of a wind-up time. And if you're continually dancing around Izaro, so let's say that Izaro is standing here, if he's looking at you, any of his attacks will be pretty much directional, pointed near you. So if you see him do some sort of big wind-up, what you want to do is just run 120 degrees around him, then return to attacking him, wait till he does another big wind-up, another 120 degrees, attack, wait until the next big wind-up, then move again. Keep doing this, and as long as you can keep control of the adds and the traps, you'll have an easy enough time. Additionally with Izaro, if you do have to panic because you just lose control of the fight and run to one of the corners of the room, it's generally pretty safe to do that. Next up is the Conquerors of the Atlas 0 Watchstone versions. So, I've got the 4 Watchstone versions here, but you can see in Haywark Hamlet that Drox the Warlord has infected this area. If I was doing a lower Watchstone version, so you know, here's what it looks like with 3 Watchstones in the zone. But if I was doing a lower number of Watchstones in the zone, then I could have access to a 0, 1, 2, or 3 Watchstone Conqueror. Actually, at this point in my progression, I can't. I'm locked into only the 4 Watchstone versions. I've done a full video on the Atlas, which I will link below. But these encounters, in order to access the 0 Watchstone versions, what you will need to do is trek out through the Atlas, explore through the Atlas until you get into Haywark Hamlet and do 3 maps there. Also, Lex Ejoris, do 3 maps there. New Vestia, do 3 maps there. Lyra Athane, do 3 maps there. By the time you've done that, you will have access to all of those boss fights. So you'll be able to fight Baran firstly, Baran the Crusader, then Veritani the Redeemer, Elhisman the Hunter, and Drox the Warlord. You get to fight them all on roughly tier 4 maps. Later on, you'll fight the same bosses again at higher monster level, and when you fight them at higher monster level, they get harder. The other boss that I want to mention in tier 1 is a little bit of an oddball in that it's miles harder than the other ones I've mentioned. So we've had Merciless Izaro, which I think is pretty accessible, maybe a smidgen harder than Kitava, and we've had the first encounters with the Conquerors of the Atlas, which again, they're a bit harder than Kitava, but they're not much harder. This one is much harder, but it's a boss that you can encounter as soon as you've done Kitava, potentially. And that is Atziri in the Apex of Sacrifice. So you will have found some of these sacrifice fragments through your travels, and if you haven't got a full set of them, the Midnight one is the rare one, and it only drops in monster level 60 and higher zones, and it's also something like, I think the drop ratio is something like 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. So 4 dusks drop for every 3 dawns, 3 dawns for every 2 noons, and 2 noons for every 1 midnight. But all the excess dusk and dawn ones can be turned into a zone. So if I was to commit to running that as a map, it would then give me portals to a Val zone. I'd run through that, and I would probably get another sacrifice fragment back as a reward for that. Keep running these, and eventually you get enough midnights that you can run Atziri if you want to. Atziri drops an amazing flask. It's not very valuable because it's really common, but it is super, super powerful. But the fight with her is hard. She has low stats, but she just does so much damage and attacks so fast that she can make meat of you if you're not ready for her. I haven't done a guide on Atziri, but there's plenty of them online. And the Atziri fight is definitely something that you can consider as maybe as a very advanced version of the tier 1 bosses. In a lot of ways she's harder than some of the tier 2 bosses, but she can be done with much worse gear. In tier 2, I want to start with the mandatory ones. These are the 1, 2, and 3 Watchstone Conquerors. So these are just the same as the 0 Watchstone versions of the Conquerors, encountered in much the same way, but they will have higher stats. And then there's the Eternal Lab, which is just like the Merciless Labyrinth, except it has higher stats. The thing with the Eternal Lab, though, that is particularly mean is that you will need to find the 6 Trials of Ascendancy in maps. If you're in a trade league, join the trade channel Trade 820, especially early on, and people will often sell you the trial that you're missing for a chaos or 2. If you're in a solo self-found, if you're playing solo self-found, unfortunately you're going to need to find them all yourself, and there's not really any way to speed them up. Solo self-found is all about getting messed around by random number generation, and the Trials of Ascendancy are a way in which that happens really badly. The reason that I say, though, that the 1, 2, 3 Watchstone Conqueror encounters and the Eternal Lab are mandatory is what's gated behind them. Eternal Labyrinth gates access to your 7th and 8th Ascendancy points, which are a huge power boost, and the 1, 2, and 3 Watchstone Conquerors grant you access to the entire flexibility of the Atlas of Worlds in the current state of the game. Next up, we have the optional bosses in Tier 2. So firstly, there is the Death and Taxes unique map. So this doesn't drop until fairly late in the current state of the Atlas, subject to change in future leagues. Currently, Necropolis only exists as a Tier 15 map, but in the next league, who knows, maybe you'll be able to get a Necropolis at a lower tier. This is an interesting map. The map is all about fighting one specific boss that's at the end of it. This boss is fairly mean, but very mechanical, and very, very doable. However, the reason I point this out as something worth doing is Unique Boss drops 18 additional currency items is a new line that was added to this map recently, and it kind of makes it worth doing. The loot from it is great, and you will often get, a Divine Orb. Sometimes you'll get an Exalt, but even if you don't get one of the sort of premium orbs, you will just get a lot of Chaos Orbs. It's quite worth doing, and it's something that you can just sit back and run 20 of even in a trade league if you really want to. Next up we have the Vaal Omnitect, which is somewhat of a practice boss. This is the end boss of the Apex of Atziri, encountered through Alva's incursion mechanics. This does not have particularly great loot at the current state of the game, but it's a good little training ground to fight against a boss that has a number of dangerous mechanics, but they're not one-shots. So you can basically go and fight this boss, get some practice dodging things, and also just applying damage to a boss that has a number of tricky mechanics about it. Unfortunately, though, the rewards aren't really there. So it's worth knowing that it's there, but there's no compelling reason to do it. Next up, there's a couple of maps that are all about the XP. So we have Powergamer's Asylum, which drops a stupidly large amount of XP, and the Beachhead, which gives even more. This is the red tier Beachhead, the tier 15 one. The lower tier Beachheads are just not so great. There's the unique map Malkoon, and there is the unique map Coward's Trial, is also really juicy when it comes to XP. Next up, we have map bosses that are encountered. Map bosses that are encountered through Einhar. So Einhar will occasionally, when you run his missions, you will occasionally get access to 4 specific bosses. There is Farrell and Venomous, which are the high tier bosses, the ones that start with F. And there's Sakawal and Kracian. Sakawal and Kracian are tier 2 bosses. They're pretty forgiving, pretty easy, but it's all about random luck whether or not you have access to them at a given point. The more Einhar missions you get, the more times you roll the dice, the more chances you've got to fight these bosses. But then they're not particularly lucrative, not particularly important. Next up, we have Syndicate Safe Houses. So these are encountered through Jun, and the way that you get these is by leveling up any of these safe house information XP things to 100%. At that point, you'll get access to a safe house where you will fight the boss of that section and anyone that is one of their underlings. So, for instance, if I was to encounter Leo at the moment, I would also get It That Fled, would join along. If I was to fight Rin in Intervention, if that safe house was full, then I'd get Gravicius and Tora as well. Some of these members of the Syndicate are much better in certain places than others. So, for instance, It That Fled is exactly where I want it, because It That Fled is great in the Research Wing, whereas Hillock in the current league, which this is somewhat unusual, Hillock I want in Intervention. In most leagues you want Chimeria in Intervention, but in this league it's Hillock. Various things change. I do need to do a full guide on the Betrayal system at some point. But if you're just messing around and running safe houses when you can, you'll get to fight these. They're lucrative if you know exactly what you're doing and if you know how to min-max the Syndicate. Even they're somewhat lucrative even if you don't know how to min-max it perfectly. But they're bosses as well that you get to fight. Additionally, there are Breachstones. So Breachstones are acquired in maps by finding these little stupid fragments that I can never be bothered picking up. Sometimes in leagues they'll drop a full Breachstone as well, and you'll just collect these. Once you collect 100 of these things, they'll turn into one of the Breachstones, and then at that point you'll be able to run them. The Zoph's Breachstone, Tull's Breachstone, Escher's Breachstone, and Ulnatol's Breachstone are all tier 2 bosses. Chayula's Breachstone and the pure versions of all of them will be in tier 3 instead. Next up, it'd be a bit remiss of me to not include these because they're sort of a boss encounter, but they're also sort of not. Blighted maps. Blighted maps that are white or yellow tier, so tier 10 and lower. I'm going to stick these in tier 2, and they're actually some of the most lucrative things in tier 2, at least if they're cheap in the league that you're running them. They drop a hell of a lot of loot, and they're pretty doable, but they test very different skills to most boss killing. Most boss killing is about doing single target DPS. Blighted maps are about projecting a small amount of damage to a lot of monsters at once. Okay, so next up we have tier 3. When we're talking tier 3, we're going to start getting into bosses that are a bit harder. These are bosses where there is absolutely no shame on your endgame character to dying to them because you make a mistake. First up, we have the 4 Watchstone versions of the Conquerors of the Atlas. This is what I've got on my Atlas at the moment because I've got all of my Watchstones planted. And at this point, every section of the Atlas is at 4 watchstones. So any Conqueror that spawns is going to be tier 14, 15, or 16. They're the same fights fundamentally as the ones that were in the first and second tiers. The monsters have higher stats. And when the monsters have higher stats, that means two things. Firstly, it means that they're much more punishing of any mistakes that you make. And secondly, they live longer, so you've got more time to make mistakes as well. However, your character is probably so much more powerful by the time you get up to 4 Watchstone Conquerors that you'll be able to rise to the challenge. The next bosses that I want to talk about are the ones that were the endgame back a few leagues ago. And these are the Shaper, the Elder, and their prerequisite bosses. We're going to start with the prerequisite bosses. So there is the Forge of the Phoenix map, the Lair of the Hydra map, the Maze of the Minotaur map, the Pit of the Chimera map, and also there are maps that look normal except they have this this sort of extra implicits. Map is influenced by the Elder, map is occupied by the Purifier. These are 8 maps total. So there's the 4 different Shaper Guardian maps, the ones that sort of stand out because they've got their astral background and the like. They're all always tier 16, and they're special maps that aren't on the Atlas. And then there's these maps that are on the Atlas, but that are tier 14, 15, or 16, and that have something unusual about them because they've got this extra thing where the area is occupied by some other boss. These 8 mini bosses are pretty mean, and they're a good example of bosses that make it into tier 3. When you kill a Minotaur, you will get a fragment of the Minotaur. The same applies for all of the other 7 bosses in this category. So kill Chimera, you'll get a fragment of the Chimera. Kill an Eradicator, you'll get a fragment of Eradication. Kill a Purifier, fragment of Purification, and so on and so forth. When you get yourself a set of these fragments, and they go into the fragment tab here, you'll be able to stick the 4 of them into your map device at once. And if you're using these colorful ones, you'll get access to the Shaper by doing that. If you're using these rounded sort of grey ones, you get access to the Elder by doing those. The Shaper and Elder I have separate guides to. I had also started doing guides to the Shaper Guardians, and if there's enough interest, I'll do guides to the Elder Guardians as well. For some reason, I missed the Minotaur when I did that, so I did a guide to the Phoenix, the Chimera, and the Hydra, but I missed the Minotaur. And then for the Elder Guardians, I haven't done those videos. But those will then give you access to the Shaper and the Elder. All 10 of these bosses, so the Shaper and his 4 minions, the Elder and his 4 minions, all of these fit into this tier 3 category of things that I think that most determined players can beat, but maybe not on their first try. Next up we have the synthesis maps, but not the Cortex. So when you complete a map, the Awakening level will give a chance for a special map to drop. So you'll see here that there's an 8% chance for an additional unique item to drop from unique map boss. And if I didn't have 32 Watchstone socketed, if I had a smaller number, then I'd have a smaller percentage chance for a unique item to drop from a map boss. Sometimes when you get that unique item, it will be a unique map, and sometimes there will be unique maps that can't drop anywhere else. There are 5 of these. There are the 4 basic Shaper the 4 basic synthesis maps, all of which end with the name Rewritten Memory. So this is Altered Rewritten Memory, Augmented Rewritten Memory, Twisted Rewritten Memory, and there's something else. Oh, sorry, no, they all end in Distant Memory. I'm an idiot. So it's Altered Distant Memory, Twisted Distant Memory, Rewritten Distant Memory, and Augmented Distant Memory. That's what they are. These maps are the synthesis unique maps, and there is also the Cortex, which is much harder, and that will be in tier 5. These ones that have their names that end in Rewritten Memory, they will drop they will drop rings sometimes, and those unique rings are somewhat special. and can be very valuable if you get the right one. Next up, we have the ones that are... next up we have Cirrus, the Awakener of Worlds, but when he's fought at a low awakening level. So Cirrus, more than anything else, his difficulty scales with the awakening level of your Atlas. If you run Cirrus at awakening level 8, you have access to all of his loot table, but additionally, he will be monster level 84, and he will have a bunch of other little buffs present. If you were to take out all of your Watchstones before fighting Cirrus, you will fight a monster level 81 version of Cirrus. 81 to 84 doesn't sound like that much, but it's something like 20% more damage and something like 100% more hit points. So there's a big difference, and fighting him at the lower level is something that you can do to get a bit of practice so that you can gain some confidence with the fight. And then once you've got that confidence with the fight, then you can go back and fight him with his full loot table active. So awakening level 0 through 5 Cirrus, monster level 81 Cirrus, is in my tier 3. My tier 4 will have the awakening level 8 Cirrus in it. Lastly, there's a couple more bosses that are random number generation dependent. So we have the harder of the various bestiary bosses. So we put Kracian and Sakawal in tier 2. I'm going to put Farrell and Venomous in tier 3. They're a bit harder. Probably actually the easiest bosses in the tier 3 section though. And they just don't have very many hit points. They were designed in a period of the game's history when player damage output was much lower than it is today. And as a result, they just haven't held up all that well. They're accessed through a combination of Einhar missions and dumb luck. So you'll run your Einhar missions. I think I've got heaps of them. I've got something like 86 of them at the moment. I just haven't been running very many missions this league. You run your Einhar missions and do high tier maps, and you will occasionally get one of those bestiary bosses in there. You won't actually fight the bestiary boss inside the map. You will fight a normal monster. Einhar will capture that, and then when you go to the menagerie and fight it there, it will be able to be sacrificed in order to open a portal to one of the bestiary bosses. Other RNG dependent bosses that you might get access to, there are the 2 abyssal liches. When you encounter an abyss in a map, if you follow it along, sometimes it will dig down into an abyssal depths, and sometimes that abyssal depths will have a Stygian Spire as its end boss. So that's not the boss, that's not what you're looking for. The bosses you're looking for are Ulaman, the Sovereign of the Well, and Amanamu, which are the... Ulaman deals chaos damage and is mechanically an easy fight, whereas Amanamu deals physical damage and is mechanically much harder. Although your defenses against physical damage are probably better than your defenses against chaos damage, Ulaman is so much mechanically easier that he is the easier of the 2 abyssal liches. Next up we have the delve bosses, Kurgle and Ahuatotli, if encountered at low depth. So when you're in the delve mines, you will sometimes encounter special zones that look like cities. Sometimes these cities will have an unusual node in them. I don't have one to showcase at the moment, but they will have a name like the Lich's Tomb, or the Grand Architect's Temple, or the one that will come up in tier 5 is the Crystal King's Throne. These zones, when you encounter them, include a boss. If you encounter them with a depth less than about 400, then the 2 of them that are not the Crystal King's Throne are pretty accessible. Next up we have the Simulacrum unique map. Under the specific setup that you tap out if you encounter Kosis the Revelation. The Simulacrum is a unique map that was added in the Delirium League. It's kind of difficult, but it starts easy for a long time. It's a 20 wave fight, and the first 15 waves, for any character that's Shaper capable, the first 15 waves will be pretty easy. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 are brutal. Those waves are out to kill you. They are out to absolutely destroy you. And they'll have a chance to spawn a unique boss by the name of Kosis the Revelation, who will butcher you given the chance. Anyway, if you don't encounter Kosis, you can probably get as far as the 18th wave of the Simulacrum. But if you do encounter Kosis, and I think you can start spawning in the 15th wave, then you probably need to escape. You probably can't go all the way in a Simulacrum at tier 3, and in fact, completing wave 20 of the Simulacrum is going to be in my tier 5 boss encounters, but you can get most of the way. So that's the reason I'm mentioning it in tier 3. Next up we have the Timeless Domain. The Domain of Timeless Conflict is an interesting little thing that was added in the Legion League. So you will have found these annoying splinters. I hate splinter mechanics, so I'm just going to have a bit of a rant there about them. I just hate looting these things. But anyway, they're what's in the game at the moment. When you put 2 or 3 of these into the map device, you'll get access to a zone that will be in the 70s. The monster level will be in the 70s, and you'll be able to fight a bunch of monsters from the Legion encounters that will respawn every time that you go near the center of the zone. If you put in 2 or 3 emblems, the zone will be fairly low level and fairly manageable, and you'll get a reasonable amount of loot out of it. However, do save putting 4 or 5 emblems in for people that have got Headhunter. So basically the reason for that is that the Domain of Timeless Conflict has a lot of rare monsters in it, and the amount of loot that you get is scaled by the number of monsters that you've killed. This means that a player with Headhunter will be killing monsters far faster than you, and therefore they're probably willing to buy your emblems off you for more than you will receive in the amount of loot. For more than the amount of loot that you'll receive, because they'll just get so much more because of the basic design of the Domain of Timeless Conflict. However, the 4-way Domain of Timeless Conflict, which will be in tier 4, not in tier 3, the 3-way Domain of Timeless Conflict is something that you can do. Just save the Templar and Maraketh emblems because they're a bit more precious. Save those ones, use the other 3. And again, in the sort of not a boss category, we have red tier blighted maps I want to add into here as something that's a bit different, and it's about damage projection rather than single target damage. Also, while we're talking about tier 3, I want to add in one advanced encounter, and this is the Uber Atziri fight. Atziri, I mentioned before, is no joke. She hits hard, she hits fast, she does a lot of damage, she doesn't stuff around, but her hit points are really low, and so she's an example of a boss that can still kill you, but has largely been power crept out of being super dangerous. Uber Atziri is, instead of fighting Atziri at monster level 70, you're fighting her at monster level 80. Additionally, the zone has a specific modifier in effect that causes all monsters to deal 60% increased damage. Needless to say, the Uber Atziri fight is no joke. However, it's mechanically very challenging, but numerically, it's quite forgiving, because Uber Atziri's stats are still based on a time in the game where pretty much no one except for the top end power gamers had 6 links. Pretty much no one had 20th level gems, again, except for power gamers, and certainly not level 20 quality gems. They were something that was like really out there to have gear like that. There were no influence mods on gear, and basically the sort of idea that people had for what an uber piece of equipment was often things that are available for 5 chaos on the 3rd day of a trade league these days. So Uber Atziri was designed to be absolutely murderous back then. Her hit points are now low enough that a lot of players can beat her really, really quickly. But she's still unforgiving, and she will still punish any mistakes that you make. So that's why I'm putting her in a special category. She's probably actually a lot mechanically harder than a lot of the tier 4 encounters, but her hit points are just so low that she can just be brute forced. Next up we have in tier 4, we have Awakening level 8 Cirrus. So it's the same Cirrus fight you know and love, except Cirrus has taken off the kid gloves. He's now got all his hit points, maybe double the hit points of the Awakening level 0 version, maybe triple, not sure, it's a lot more, and does more damage, and seems to act a bit faster as well. This is a harder version of the fight, but it's more lucrative. and it's the one you want to build up towards doing. At the moment, being able to run Cirrus every 30 or 40 maps that you run is a big incentive for having a character that's capable of killing bosses. Next up is the Uber Elder encounter. So I mentioned that you fight the Shaper and the Elder earlier. When you do that, when you kill the Shaper, you will be guaranteed to get either a Fragment of Knowledge or a Fragment of Shape. When you kill the Elder, you will get a Fragment of Terror or a Fragment of Emptiness. Complete a complete set of 4 of those, and you will be able to access the Uber Elder encounter. Uber Elder is basically Shaper and Elder at the same time, with a couple of their nastiest mechanics removed. So the ones that don't play well with each other are removed, but it is miles harder than fighting Shaper alone, miles harder than fighting Elder alone, and additionally you have to deal with a whole bunch of nastiness from the arena itself. Uber Elder is a difficult fight, but it is not an absolutely brutal one. There are harder ones, but it's something that is a major milestone, and something for a lot of players to have as an aspirational goal that you might not get in the current league that you're playing, but there's something that's worth working towards. Uber Elder also drops one of the most powerful jewels in the game, the Watcher's Eye, as well as a number of build-defining unique items. So it's a really worthwhile encounter to run. Next up we have Kurgle and the Ahutotli from the Delve Mines, but when they're encountered a bit deeper in the mines than you normally encounter them. So I'm going to just mention them here, but they're basically the same fights, just with higher stats. And likewise a couple of other special nodes in the Delve Mines. And the one I wanted to point out, why I'm at the spot that I'm in the Delve Mines at the moment, is that somewhere up here is a Crystal Spire special node. There's a number of these that normally are very, very challenging, but I've found this one very shallow in the Delve Mines. So it's only at depth 151, which is very unusual. Normally you would not encounter a Crystal Spire until 400, 500, and even then they're very rare. If you encounter those, they're also somewhat of a tier 4 boss. So each of the different 6 types of zone in the Delve Mines has one special fossil node, like the Crystal Spire, which is the one from the Abyssal Depths. I think it's the Magma Cavity. There's the one that drops the Faceted Fossil. There's the Stonewood Hollow, which drops the Bloodstained Fossil. There's one for the Fractured Fossil, which is a valuable one at the moment. I think that's just called Humid Fissure. And those are all really, really lucrative nodes. Very worth doing, but additionally, they're somewhat of a boss encounter as well. Lastly, I want to mention 3 boss encounters that are, broadly speaking, not worth running for most people. The first one is the 4-way Domain of Timeless Conflict. This is worth running, but if and only if you own a Headhunter. The reason for that, I mentioned before, that these emblems are just worth so much more to a player with Headhunter than they are to you if you don't have one, and therefore they will buy it for more than the value of the loot that you can get in there. However, you do want to do a 4-way domain once per league, because that will unlock your 5-way map device, which then gives you access to using more scarabs when you're running maps. The second encounter that I want to suggest you don't generally run, but that is cool to know that it's there and might be worth doing in the future. In the Temple of Atziri, you have a chance of spawning Atziri there. Atziri in the Temple of Atziri is brutal beyond belief. She doesn't have the... I mean, she starts out... You'll encounter her probably at monster level 83, 84... Oh, sorry, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, depending on whether you're using Cirrus's Watchstones to augment your maps or not. But let's say you encounter her at monster level 83, which is probably the most common. That means that she's got a little bit more damage than you would encounter in the Alluring Abyss and a bit more hit points. However, she doesn't have the usual Alluring Abyss mod of 60% increased damage. So this might make you think, oh yeah, she's going to be easier than she would be in the Abyss. What she gets instead is a temple-wide mod that comes from her own room, so you can't avoid it, of monsters have 20% increased action speed. So spellcasting, move speed, and the like. This is absolutely barbarous on Atziri. because she's a boss that has a number of wind-up skills that kill you. So she has her Empowered Stormcall, which is a one-shot that has a wind-up. She has her Empowered Flame Blast, which are a one-shot with a wind-up. All sorts of skills that are one-shots with wind-ups. She will use them all, and she will absolutely make a mess out of you if given the chance. Basically speaking, though, there's pretty much no known reason to fight her unless she's been given one of the premium divination cards, and we just don't know about that as yet. She doesn't seem to drop any particularly good loot. And so, unfortunately, Temple Atziri, as much as she's an exciting fight, there's basically no real compelling reason to do it. The other one that I want to mention that is pretty much not worth doing is the Syndicate Mastermind. So Jun controls the Syndicate encounters, and when you show investigation, after a certain period of time, after you've run enough of the safe houses, you'll gain access to the Mastermind fight. Now, the Mastermind fight drops some pretty good loot, but the opportunity cost for running it is too high. What happens is, when you run the Syndicate Mastermind, all of these green and red lines that you've got connecting your Syndicate, all of them disappear. This is really, really, really bad, as essentially these are a major loot multiplier to all Syndicate encounters that you do, and a multiplier to the amount of access to the Syndicate safe houses that you get. So essentially, running the Mastermind safe house burns all of those bridges in order to maybe get a chance at a Nook's Crown if you're lucky, the divination card that drops from the Syndicate Mastermind, or one of the Mastermind exclusive uniques. It's a bit different if you're in solo self-found and you're determined to get your hands on a Cinder Swallow urn or the diadem that she drops. But broadly speaking, if you're in a trade league, just buy any of the uniques that the Syndicate Mastermind drops. People run the Mastermind not realizing how bad an idea it is, and ultimately you can take advantage of their misfortune. It sounds horrible, but it's true. You don't want to be the person running the Mastermind, you want to be the person that is running the safe houses more. And lastly, I mentioned before the 4-way Timeless Domain encounter. Don't run this multiple times if you don't own a Headhunter, because if you're in a trade league, you can simply sell your Exodus emblems to someone else that has a Headhunter, and they will pay you more than the value of the loot that you get, because the Headhunter will amp up the loot that they get. So next up is the Tier 5 boss encounters. These are the ones that are designed to absolutely be brutal. These are the ones that are designed to give power gamers a run for their money. That's what they're for. They're going to be ones that if you don't think of yourself as a power gamer, in the current state of the game, you won't be able to beat them. So the first one of these is the Cortex. The Cortex is one of the synthesis maps. We were going through the various distant memories before. The Cortex is its own beast. It's much harder. Essentially, you fight 4 bosses that are very similar to the rewritten memories, but you fight them 1, 2, 3, 4 straight after each other. Only one opportunity to regenerate flasks in the middle, and these bosses have higher stats, and they're just generally speaking meaner than they are in the rewritten memories. And additionally, there's a bunch of other factors going on. It's a chaotic encounter. It's one where you will lose control of the arena because the bosses will deposit piles of garbage on the ground that will deal damage over time if you stand in them. So that will continue to expand throughout the duration of the fight. And additionally, there's a whole lot of big one-shots to dodge, some of which are well telegraphed, some of which are not. And there's a number of just other ordinary attacks as well. The Cortex is brutal, and it's definitely a Tier 5 encounter. It's quite a bit harder than the Tier 4 encounters, which are designed to be ones that a skilled player that's not a power gamer can beat. These are the ones where you need to be a power gamer. The second one is All the Crystal King, mostly found deep in the Delve Mines, and the fact with the Delve Mines, the scaling there is something that just needs to be quickly mentioned. The deeper that you go in the Delve Mines, once you get to monster level 83, the depth scales both monster hit points and monster damage, and the monster damage scaling is pretty explosive. So by the time that you get to depth 500, you'll find that all the monsters are doing something like double damage and have something like triple hit points. Go to depth 1000, and suddenly the monsters are doing like 6 times their baseline damage, and they might have 4 times their baseline hit points. Go to 3000, and the monsters are dealing like 25 times their baseline damage, and they've got something like 12 or 15 times their baseline hit points. The key thing this means is that the deeper you get, the more likely it is that any hit from a monster will one-shot you. And all the Crystal King is almost only ever found very deep in the Delve Mines. When I say very deep, I mean 500 and deeper. What this means in practice is that All is a boss that requires almost flawless coordination to beat him. You need to be anticipating his attack patterns and reacting to them before they happen. So if he makes his default attack, which sort of just looks like a sword swing, you need to anticipate it coming and hide behind him before he initiates that swing. You also need to keep up this flawless execution for not just a few seconds, but potentially for several minutes. The reward for doing this, though, is considerable. All drops the All's Uprising unique amulet, which, when you identify it, if it is related to firstly you can sell it unidentified and it's valuable then. But if you do identify it, if it's related to a popular aura, then it will be worth a lot. The next one that I want to put into tier 5 is the Simulacrum, but this time, I mentioned in tier 3 that the Simulacrum was there as well. In tier 3, that was on the basis that you exit the Simulacrum once things start getting hard. Tier 5 is to beat the Simulacrum no matter what happens. That means you've got to kill Kosis the Revelation, potentially at wave 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, or 20. If he spawns at 18, 19, or 20, you are going to be at least 90% delirious, which is a massive debuff to your stats, and also means that not only are you dealing with Kosis's dangerous attacks, but also the attacks of a whole bunch of delirium-enhanced trash monsters at the same time. The other thing is that the Simulacrum takes place in clones of the various towns in the game, and those towns don't have much space to move around in them. That's a real factor in there, and it means that the Simulacrum, when you're actually going right through to the end, is an extraordinarily difficult and dangerous encounter. However, it's probably the easiest of the tier 5 boss encounters. It's brutal, but it's doable, and it rewards something a little bit different to some of the other boss encounters, which are all about single target damage. This is all about the multi-target damage that can also do solid single target. Next up is Hall of the Grandmasters. I have to mention this as one of those encounters that really catches people off guard. So this unique map has probably dropped for you, and it's just not clear what it does. It contains the Immortalized Grandmasters. PvP damage scaling in effect. What does that mean, you might be asking? Well, what it means is that this is a unique map where you are going to be fighting against copies of player characters. Those player characters haven't been chosen specifically to be the most dangerous ones possible. The way they've been chosen is that they've basically are players who bought high tier supporter packs. Back at a certain point in the game's history, there was a Grandmaster pack, which included the ability to have one of your characters copied, and the copy put into the Hall of the Grandmasters. Now, what's important about this zone is that some players just bought the pack for the other swag that was in it, and they submitted a character that was just, their best character, but it wasn't designed to troll players. However, some people designed a character to troll, and there's 3 main ways that they've done this. The first one is to have a character that attacks you in a very unorthodox way. There is a character that has a monstrosity of a cast on death shenanigans that will run straight for you, and I think they just drink a caustic mana flask when they get close to you, which then kills them, and then causes them, because they're chaos inoculation, and when they get there, that then sets off all of their various cast on death spells. So I believe there's a character like that. There's also the character Danzig, who was basically decked out in all mirror tier gear. It was a lightning strike character, so a bow attack build that just sits off screen and tries to off screen you. The same way that we do. If we go very, very deep into the Delve Mines, we tend to try and off-screen monsters. Well, Danzig sees us the same way that we see monsters very, very deep into the Delve Mines. So he's one of the more fiendish ones. Then there's the various ones that have been built in some way to try to be immortal. None of these Grandmasters are unkillable, but a number of them can have 100% block chance and can have enormous defenses through various other means. Generally speaking, you want to deal damage over time that does not rely upon inflicting hits, and you want to do so on a build that has enormously overcapped resistances or has some other defensive mechanics that can enable you to survive against targets like Danzig. Needless to say, the Hall of the Grandmasters is brutal. It doesn't follow the rest of the game's rules, and that's one of the things that makes it so nasty. Also, you will encounter player characters that have legacy effects on their characters, so things that no longer exist in the game that are being patched, but that they get to keep. So Hall of the Grandmasters is brutal, and it's one that I have beaten it before, but I think I did it on my character in the Synthesis League. I'm pretty sure I died a few times doing so. On the flip side though, it does drop some pretty awesome divination cards, so it's kind of worth it. The last one I want to mention in Tier 5 is the 5-way version of the Hall of the Grandmasters. So this is where you've already done a 4-way encounter, and by doing so you have then unlocked the 5-way map device. Once you've done that, you then run all 5 of them at once. Needless to say, just like with the 4-way one, you kind of need a headhunter for this to work in terms of getting loot returns from it. If you don't own a headhunter, you should probably sell your emblems to someone else that does own one. However, it can be a very lucrative source of wealth if you've already got a headhunter and you just want to kill a lot of monsters really fast and get ridiculous amounts of loot from it. Anyways, that ends this guide. If you've got any comments or questions, fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there, and I hope you have a good one.